All right, it's time for us to begin. We're delighted that all of you are with us today. We're in a study of love and marriage, and we'd like for you to make a personal application of the things that we're suggesting this quarter. I think it'll help all of us have better marriages. Now, last week we talked about what it means to be a wife, and today we want to talk about what it means to be a husband. So you ladies will be able today to sit back and relax and elbow your husband now and then to make sure he's listening. And we appreciate the fact that you are here. There are some folks who say that there are two classes of people in our world. One is those who are married, and the second is those who want to be married. I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I think there are people who don't want to be married, maybe some who don't need to be married. One woman said she didn't need to be married. She said she has two animals or three animals that do the same thing. She has a dog that growls all morning, a parrot that talks all afternoon, and a tomcat that comes in late at night. So she didn't need to be married. That may be true with some folks, but I think that most people want to be married. Socrates was supposed to be a wise man. He said it is good for every man to marry. If he marries well, he will be happy. If he doesn't marry well, he will become a philosopher. And that is good for every man. However, God did not design marriage to test man's patience. He designed it to bless mankind. And when man marries and follows God's formula for marriage, it will be a blessing to him and his wife. And we're trying to suggest some things this quarter that might help all of us, whoever we are, to do a better job at being a husband or a wife. If a marriage is successful, much depends upon the man in that marriage. Of course, we could say that about the woman as well, but today we're talking about the man, the husband. Have you ever thought about that word husband and what it means and where it came from? Husband. It is said by some that it is a contraction of the two words house and band. Man, the husband, is a band around the house. And so it became husband. Truly, the husband is a house band, a band of strength around the home, upholding it, protecting it, and keeping it together. And so I think maybe that's a good word to use for that man in the home. Now, the Bible has much to say about husbands and wives, and I think one of the most beautiful descriptions of the husband's role is found in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33. We won't read all of that in the beginning, but we'll be referring to that particular section. This is a very clear picture of what the Christian husband ought to be in the family. And if a person reads that carefully and puts it into practice in his life, then the marriage is going to be a good marriage. The husband will be a good husband. He is that person who is the stable center around whom the marriage revolves. Much depends upon that man who is the husband in the home. Now, I want to suggest several roles that are suggested in the Bible, roles that the husband is to play. Number one, the husband is the head of the home. In verses 32 and 33, rather 22 and 23 of Ephesians 5, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Now, that's not a very difficult passage to understand. Accepting it is a different matter. But the Bible teaches very clearly that the husband is to be the head of the home. Now, every institution that God has made must have a head. And every institution that man has started must have a head. Now, a man might start a business, but he'll have to have a CEO or someone in charge of that thing in order for it to succeed. If a man does anything like that, he has to have somebody in charge of it. And when God starts something, it also must have a head. And God is the one who started the home. In Genesis chapters 1 through 3, we read about that story. God started the home and taught that the man is to be the head of that home. Back in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, in verse 16, after Adam and Eve had sinned, God brought punishment upon both of them. And in verse 16, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Now that states it very clearly again. God determined that the husband is to be the head of the home. He is to rule over the woman. He should be the leader, the provider, the protector, the head of his family. His desire, of course, is to have a good home, and if we follow God's directions, it'll be that type of home. Now, I see two extremes sometimes in regard to this teaching. One extreme is that a man is a dictator. Sometimes the man, it's usually the man who thinks this way, thinks he is a dictator. He can just dictate to his wife and children, and everybody has to bow down and do everything he says. And the way he said do it is either his way or the highway. And I think I've read every verse in the Bible that has to do with this subject. And I don't believe I have read any verse that teaches that the man is a dictator, that he can dictate things regardless of what's good or what his wife and children want or what's best for them. But I don't believe the Bible teaches that he is a dictator like Stalin was over Russia, like Putin is over Russia now. He is not a dictator, but he is to be the ruler of the home. But there are a number of things involved in that, as we shall see. So one extreme is that he is a dictator, and the other extreme is to deny his role as a leader in the home at all. Now, there are feminists, some others today, who say that the man is not to be over the woman in the home. Now, of course, we understand that that is an extreme as well. When I was preaching for the Avondale Church in Atlanta a number of years ago, we had an elderly couple in that congregation who were fine people otherwise, but his wife had a peculiar idea about this business that the husband is to be the leader. She said, I don't believe the story of Adam and Eve. I don't believe that Adam was to be over Eve, that she was to be in subjection to him. I don't know how many times she talked to me about that and expressed that idea. Well, that's an extreme as well. The Bible teaches that the husband is to be the head of the home, and in the case of Adam and Eve, God made it clear in the very beginning, but she never did believe it. I suppose she died believing that the wife is not to be in subjection to her husband. Now, wives should allow their husbands to be the head. As I mentioned last week, I have counseled with women on this very point, and I have had women to tell me, I would be glad for my husband to be the head of the home. I wish he would take the lead as the leader of the home, but he wouldn't do it. And a home is not what it ought to be if a man doesn't do that. But wives, in many cases, want their husbands to take the lead, and the husbands just won't do it. Picture a counseling session. If I'm talking with a husband and a wife, we begin to talk about this thing. This is what happens sometimes. The husband will say, Charlie, read those passages again to my wife to tell her that she's supposed to be in subjection to me. Well, if he has to try to make her be in subjection to him, that's a wrong relationship. Something is wrong there. He, of course, would want her to know what the Bible teaches, but if he had been taking the lead as he ought and according to the Bible, he wouldn't have to have the passage read to her again. So it's a wrong relationship if he has to make her be in subjection to him. Now, he must first rule himself before he can rule his wife. Solomon said in Proverbs 16 in verse 32, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty. If a man has his anger under control, he's better than a mighty man who might command an army. Then he said, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh the city. If a man can rule his anger and rule his spirit, he'll be prepared then to rule the home. And so a man needs to begin with himself and make sure that he has things under control before he can very well lead his wife. Now, the Bible nowhere suggests that a husband is to be inconsiderate of his wife and his children. Now, the Bible teaches clearly that the husband is to be the leader in the home, but it does not teach that he is to do everything and not be considerate of his wife and children and what's best and good for all of them. A man is foolish who will not listen to his wife in a number of cases. We mentioned last week that Peter said that Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Sarah recognized the fact that she was in subjection to her husband, that Abraham was the leader of their home. But let me mention a passage perhaps that you have not read carefully at least. Genesis 21 and verse 12. Now God is speaking to Abraham here. Remember, Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. She was in subjection to him. But in Genesis 21 and verse 12, God said to Abraham, in all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. Do you ever think about that? God is talking to Abraham. Sarah recognizes him as the leader in that home, and yet God told Abraham, in all that she saith unto thee, hearken to her voice. There are times when a wife knows more than a man about a certain thing. She might be better prepared to deal with a certain situation. He may not know what's best, but a man who's wise is going to listen to his wife, consider those things, and while he is the head, he can still get her ideas on that thing, and he might say, I think that's a better idea than mine, let's go that way. A husband has to have sense enough to listen to his wife sometimes. Remember that passage in Genesis 21 and verse 12. Now, let's suggest another area in which the husband needs to be the leader. The husband loves his wife. In our text in Ephesians 5:25, Paul said, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church. Now, the love of a husband to his wife and for his wife is very much like the love of God, the love of Christ. I understand the Greeks had 4 words in their language for love. It describes 4 kinds of love. Now, I'm not suggesting that all these 4 words are found in the Bible, but I am suggesting that they are found in the Greek language, and they had 4 words to describe 4 types of love to them. The first one we might call strawberry shortcake love. Now, it has to do with something physical, you see. You eat strawberry shortcake, and that's a physical thing. And this type of love they're talking about might be described that way. The Greek word is eros, E-R-O-S, and that's the way most of us would pronounce it, eros. Now, we get the word erotic from that word. What is something that's erotic? Doesn't it talk about the lower level of man's nature, appealing to the baser side of man's nature, physical things? It might be akin to lasciviousness. It might produce lasciviousness. You might think of the Playboy magazine. You've heard of it. That would be an erotic type of magazine. It would cause people to think wrong things. It could produce lasciviousness. Now, when a husband has this kind of love, it's the lowest kind. It's about like animal love. Animals can love in the way in which that word would describe it. He's marrying a sweet little dish. But you know, if you were eating a strawberry shortcake and the cake gets soggy and the whipped cream sags, what do you do with that cake? You get rid of it. If he's married to a sweet young lady, a sweet little dish, and then age or illness robs her of her beauty, he no longer thinks of her as that perfect sweet little dish. What does he do? He swaps her in on a newer model, you see. That type of love is not the kind of love the Bible is talking about when the Bible says, husbands, love your wives. And that word eros is not the word that's used there for the word love in English. Now, that type of love is not the kind of love that will make a marriage last. If a man has only that kind of love, then if that is changed in some way, no longer thinks of her as a sweet little dish, he want to get another one. A second word in the Greek language is storge, and we might call this Aunt Mabel love. Now, a man might love Aunt Mabel because she's his aunt. He feels an obligation to love her. Now, that's not the word that describes a husband's love for his wife. No wife wants her husband to love her because he has an obligation to do it, because she's his wife. That won't make a marriage what it ought to be. Storge is not the word the Bible uses to describe the kind of love that a husband is to have for his wife. And then third, there is a type of love that we might call bowling team love. It comes from the word philos, from which we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, or philanthropy, when somebody has human love, concern for other people, like Bill Gates may give billions of dollars because he's a philanthropist, is human love. Now, that's not the love the Bible talks about when it talks about a husband loving his wife as Christ loved the church. And we say that might be like bowling team love. Suppose a man has a woman as his team member in bowling. She's a good-looking woman. He has a lot of fun with her, and so he has a love for her, a human love. But suppose another woman comes along who's better looking than her, and with whom he has more fun. What's he going to do? He's going to change bowling partners, and he will change wives, if that's the kind of love he has. That type of love is not what Paul is talking about when he said, husbands, love your wives. And number 4, there is husband and wife love. And the Greek word that describes that kind of love, as the Bible uses it, is agape. Now that love is much like God's love. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 8, Paul said, God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Now, the word that's used for God's love there is that word agape. And in our text in Ephesians 5:25, it's agape. Man's love for his wife ought to be like God's love for man. Now, does God love us because we're good looking? Some of us wouldn't pass the test, if that were true. Does God love us because we have a lot of money? Is he in love with us because we are good people? No, that word agape doesn't mean God loves you because you're rich or good looking or you're a good person. God just loves us. And it's not described by these outward things. And if a man loves his wife only because she's good looking, what's he going to do when the looks pass away? If he loves her for her money, suppose she loses the money, what's he going to do? You see, our love is to be like God's love. And God's love is not based upon those human things. Now, a man's wife ought to look good to him. But if he only marries her because she looks good, that marriage may not make it. Husband is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Now, sometimes men marry someone because of looks or some other outward thing like that. I read about a man's wife who was sick. He took her to the doctor. The doctor and a nurse took her into a room and really examined her. And the doctor came out and said to that husband, I don't like the looks of your wife at all. He said, I don't either, Doc, but boy, can she cook. Sometimes people marry for outward things like that really won't pass the test. The Bible teaches that a husband is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. It's agape love, not based upon her looks or money or whether she's this or that. It's based upon the fact that he loves her. Now, these other things are going to play into it, but we need to realize that it must be like God's love. And then number 3, the husband honors his wife. Last week we talked about Peter's statement that the husband is to love his wife, dwell with her according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, that his prayers be not hindered. How would a husband honor his wife? Well, by showing sympathy and understanding for her. And he wouldn't let her go out there and plow in a field, because that would not be good for her with her size and weakness and everything. I was talking about this in a class on one occasion and pointing out the fact that a husband ought to show sympathy and understanding for his wife. And I asked him, what do you men do to show your sympathy and understanding for your wife? You ever do anything that you ought not to be doing because it's not best for her? What have you done for your wife like that? And a man back in the back said, well, I put the gas in the lawnmower for her. He was being a little facetious, I think, about that, and I hope he was. But a man can show his wife honor by helping her with things and doing things like plowing and that type of thing that might not be good for her physically. Sometimes we husbands ought to step in and help them with dishwashing or vacuuming and things like that. I read something a long time ago that still resonates with me. I read that a study of police records shows that no man was ever shot while he was doing the dishes. That might be a good idea. It's safer if you'll be doing the dishes. It probably would work when you're vacuuming too. You'd probably be pretty safe that way. A man can show sympathy and understanding for his wife when he comes in the afternoon. He's tired, worked all day, but his wife has also. And if he makes her go in there and do all the cooking, washing dishes, getting the kids ready for bed, and getting their homework and all of that, while he's sitting there watching TV or reading the paper, he's not really showing the honor and understanding and sympathy for his wife that he ought to be showing to her. There was one woman who thought her husband ought to be helping her wash the dishes, and she found a scripture and read it to him. You ladies might want to remember this. 2 Kings 21, verse 13. And I will wipe Jerusalem as a man wipeth a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. Now, I don't know necessarily that means he has to wash the dishes, but at least he does a good job with it, it sounds like, when he does it, turning it upside down. But you might want to remember that verse. It might help you a little bit with the wife. So the husband must honor his wife, and he can help or honor her by helping her do these various things, by making her one who shares in his life. If a husband loves his wife, he lets her share in his life. If he doesn't share with her his hopes and dreams and heartaches and sorrows and joys, she's really not close to it. He needs to honor her by letting her share in all of his life. He doesn't keep secrets from her. And by showing tenderness and affection to her. Peter said, as she is the weaker vessel. Now, in what sense is she weaker than a man? Well, I don't believe she's weaker than the man morally or spiritually or interest in Christianity. Ladies, don't tell your husbands I said this, but in many cases, the wife is stronger than her husband morally and spiritually and in regard to concern for her soul. Go to any congregation, take a survey, and count the number of women and the number of men. About 99 times out of 4, you're going to find a lot more women than men. There is some reason for it. There may be several things. But in my observation, in my work with people for a long time, I have found that generally, women are more concerned about spiritual things and serving God than men are. Generally, that's true. That's, of course, not true in every case. But generally, it would be true. And so he needs to honor her because she is one who is really interested in spiritual things and serving God. Someone said, if the Pope had been married, he would never have thought of the doctrine of papal infallibility. You know, the Pope supposedly thinks he is infallible. He doesn't make mistakes. But if he had been married, he would have learned better than that. He would have known. We can honor our wives in various ways, and the Bible teaches that a husband is to honor his wife. And then the husband is faithful to his wife. In Hebrews 13 and verse 4, The Bible says, "For marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." Now, a husband is to be faithful to his wife. And if he is unfaithful to her, if he goes to another woman to find fulfillment for his physical desires, then he is a whoremonger. He is an adulterer, or a fornicator, and he will be judged for that. He will be condemned. He'll lose his soul. It's a very serious matter. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Apostle Paul talks about the husband and wife responsibility in fulfilling those needs of the other. And he tells us in verses 2 and 3, "Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband." The husband is to be faithful to his wife. If he goes to some other woman for fulfillment of these needs, then he is a sinner, an adulterer, fornicator, and he can lose his soul. Now today, the Playboy philosophy says that's out of date. That might have been all right back in the first century, but it's not all right today. Things have changed. So the modern culture says that a man ought to have a variety. Variety is the spice of life, they say. He ought to be able to go to any other woman that he desires if he can. Well, we serve the same God they served. We face the same destiny those people faced. We're going to be judged by the same word by which those people will be judged. And so we must be faithful to our wives just as they were taught to be faithful to their wives. In marriage, we're taught to be faithful. Anything else is wrong. In marriage, we're promised to be faithful until death. In the marriage vows, we say, "Until death do us part." We're to be faithful to our mates until death. The unfaithful husband proves himself unworthy of her love, and he does not love his wife as Christ loved the church. Can you imagine Christ being unfaithful to the church? Can you imagine Christ being disloyal to his bride, the church? Certainly not. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. Verse 25. So the husband is to be faithful to his wife. That's one of the roles that a husband is to play, faithful husband. And then the husband provides for his wife. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, Paul tells us, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." A husband is responsible for providing for his family. A husband's salary is not his own to use as he desires alone. I was working with a young couple in Atlanta years ago. It was a young couple, they had a little baby, and the husband was working off somewhere a good distance away, so he'd be gone all week, leave Sunday afternoon and go work somewhere and then come back. It's about like people who work out on an oil rig. They usually stay out there for a week or two. He went off to work for a week, he'd come home on Friday night. When he left on Sunday afternoon, he would not even leave money with his wife to buy milk for that little baby. It is hard for me to imagine it even now. He said, "It's my money, I work for it." Can you imagine a husband not even leaving money with his wife to buy milk for that baby? His wife was desperate. She began to work for a bank, and dealing with money all the time was a great temptation because her husband was not taking care of her. And she embezzled some money from the bank and was caught. And then I was busy not only trying to save that marriage, I was trying to help keep her out of jail and prison. She could have gone to prison, though she was a fine young lady, except for that problem. Fine young lady. Well, she realized her error. Her husband paid off that money that she embezzled, and and they were able to work that part out, and she didn't have to go to jail. She went to the bank and apologized to those of the bank for stealing that money. She tried to make it right as best she could, but that didn't solve the problem with that young man. Somehow he did not realize that he had a responsibility to take care of his family. And he's the one who led that young lady, his wife, into stealing that money. I have seen men spend money on alcohol and tobacco while their children were hungry. A man needs to realize he has a responsibility to take care of his family. I've seen it firsthand. My father was a drunkard, smoked heavily. He was uneducated and had just a small job, didn't pay much money, and he used much of what he earned to buy alcohol and tobacco. He had 8 kids, and he wasn't taking care of his family. A husband is to take care of his family, provide for his family. That's what God said. Now, let's shift gears a little bit. Instead of mentioning some things that are specifically said for the husband, let's think about some husband's faults. Number one, he doesn't spend enough time with his family, his wife. I remember hearing a couple that went to a marriage counselor, and counselor had both of them there. He said to the man, from your standpoint, what do you see as a problem in your marriage? And he said, well, what's her name here says I haven't been spending enough time with her. It sounds like he had not been spending enough time with her, couldn't even remember her name. Now, I've seen that. Various places where I have preached, I played softball. We'd have a softball team among the young men. I played softball until I was up in my 60s. I loved softball. I didn't go to a gym and take exercise, but I played softball. Well, I was preaching for a certain congregation, and we had a young man playing softball with us, and he was a tremendous athlete. He had played football for the Tennessee Vols in college. After college, he went to dental school and became a dentist. So he was a dentist and a member of the church where I was preaching, and he played with us. Not only with our team, he was on 3 softball teams. Think how much time would be involved in him playing softball instead of being home with his family part of the time. I've seen sometimes husbands who were so involved with hunting, fishing, or playing ball and this and that, and they didn't spend much time with their families, and that caused problems within the family. Well, we need to be very careful and be sure we allot enough time for our families and be with them enough really to lead the family. Another fault of men, taking wife for granted. And you might ask, well, how can a man take his wife for granted? Well, suppose during their courtship, he's trying to win her heart, and he's concerned about his manners, he's concerned about thoughtfulness, doing things for her. When he gets in the car, he opens the car door for her. When he gets to the restaurant, he opens the door for her. He helps her be seated at the table. He's concerned about thoughtfulness and good manners. But then after he gets married, after 2 or 3 years, he expects his wife to climb over a barbed wire fence wearing a long dress and high heel shoes with a kid under each arm. And he says, Sal, can't you keep up? After he gets married, he forgets about his thoughtfulness and manners and all those things. He takes her for granted, assumes he's got her. He doesn't have to be worried anymore about being thoughtful or using good manners. Husbands sometimes are like that. They take their wives for granted. I found this poem somewhere. A woman, good sirs, doesn't ask for a lot or expect to always be adored, but she wants at least to be noticed and not, as soon as she's married, ignored. It isn't your face or your fatness of purse that leaves her in time disenchanted. She knows she was taken for better or worse, but she will not be taken for granted. We husbands need to realize, can't take her for granted. We better assume we're still courting her. Oftentimes when I'm doing some marriage counseling with a couple, I suggest that they go back and court like they did before they got married. Go back and do the things you did to catch her, young men. And if you'll do that, you can hold her. But if you're not concerned about things like that, you can lose her. You can take the wife for granted. And then number 3, he needs to tell her that he loves her. Well, another problem that a man sometimes makes is he compares his wife with his mother. Sometimes it's in regard to cooking. After a young man gets married, he notices his wife's cooking is not like his mama's, and he criticizes her because her cooking is not like his mama. Now, if we have any young men here, let me tell you something. When a young man gets married, his mother has had about 20 years experience. The wife hasn't had. And if he will give his wife 20 years experience and 3 or 4 kids to take care of, she'll probably be able to cook circles around your mama. So we need to be careful and not criticize the wife because her cooking is not like mama's cooking. Well, another mistake that men make is he makes his wife the brunt of his jokes. Sometimes men hurt their wives very deeply by making jokes and making their wives the brunt of the jokes. Suppose a young couple's in a group of young couples. They begin to talk about accidents, and the wife says a large percentage of accidents occur in the kitchen. Her husband speaks up and says, yes, and then we have to eat it and pretend we like it. He's throwing off on his wife's cooking, criticizing her cooking. And husbands need to be very careful. He can hurt his wife by doing things like that. Husband should not hurt his wife by making her the brunt of his jokes. No husband should belittle his wife in public or in private. And then he forgets about his personal appearance. Now, obviously, a man and wife are not going to continue to dress real well in a tux and all that stuff after they get through with the wedding. They're going to dress down some. But still, sometimes men are not as concerned about that as women, and that can hurt a marriage relationship. I've seen husbands and wives sometimes that had a little trouble because of that. He forgets his personal appearance. After he gets married, he may not get a bath as often as he ought. He may smell like he's been mowing 4 acres of wild onions. And he may say, well, I get a shower every Saturday night whether I need it or not, especially in hot weather. And he may not be too concerned about how he looks. You know, when he was courting, he was concerned about how he looked. I mean, he really was dressing to a T trying to impress her. But after he gets married, he may forget about that. He may not be concerned about how he looks. I heard about a woman who called the police one time and said her husband was missing. She hadn't seen him in 2 days. And the policeman said, well, give me a description of him, and we'll put out an APB on him and see if we can find him and bring him home. She said, well, he's short, fat, bald-headed. By the way, just forget about it. If we forget about personal appearance and some things like that that we were concerned about before marriage, then it can cause problems in your marriage as well. Well, there are some faults of husbands that might need to be corrected. Now, last week I gave 10 commandments for wives. It's only fair that I give 10 commandments for husbands as well. So notice these. Number 1, treat your wife with strength and gentleness. I have a book in my library on my home entitled Man of Steel and Velvet. The idea of the book is a man ought to be real strong, protect his wife, take care of her, but he needs to deal with her as with velvet. And then number 2, give ample praise and assurance. Now, a husband needs to be showing his wife that he loves her. Flowers sometimes might help. Years ago, I heard a story of a man who had not been giving flowers to his wife, and he decided one day that he ought to do that. And so he said, I'll order some flowers and pick them up on the way home and take them to her. So he did it, picked up a dozen red roses. He came home, instead of just walking in, he rang the doorbell. When his wife came to the door, there he stood with a smile on his face and a dozen red roses and handed them to her. And she began to cry. He said, what's wrong, hon? Why are you crying? She said, well, Sally spilled a jar of syrup on our new carpet today, Billy broke my new expensive vase, and now you come home drunk. She may think you're drunk if you do something good for her like that, but still it would be good. I had trouble with that myself. Years ago, I was not used to giving flowers to my wife, and when I was going to Russia, one time I had to be gone on her birthday, and so I thought I'd give her a dozen red roses before I left for her birthday. I ordered them and sent them to her. She was the secretary for Alabama Christian Academy then. And after she received those flowers, she called me and said, "Are you drunk?" She'd heard me tell that story a number of times, so she got the point. We can show them in various ways that we love them. And then define the areas of responsibility. If a husband and wife decide who's going to do what, that can solve some problems down the line, you see. And then number 5, remember the importance of little things. Now, wives like to be remembered on her birthday and anniversary date, little things like that. So men need to remember the importance of those little things. And then again, recognize her need for togetherness. A wife wants to be with her husband. She doesn't want him gone all the time. Some years ago, I read a sermon by Brother Batselberry Baxter, and he told about a lawyer who had a very busy law practice, very successful, but it was keeping him away from home a great deal. He was not with his wife as much as he ought to be, and he decided to change that. He gave up his law practice. They bought a tractor trailer, a diesel truck and tractor trailer, and began to move people from one place to another all over the country. His wife could go with him and be with him all the time that way. Now that's a pretty big sacrifice, to give up a lucrative law practice and start moving people here and there. But a man must be willing to make some sacrifices if he is not with his wife as much as he ought. He'll need to make some sacrifices. He'll need to do it for the good of his home. And then number 7, give her a sense of security. Not only financial security, though that's very important, but also knowing that she's loved and wanted and appreciated, and that she feels a valuable place in his life. He needs to show her that she's really important, a valuable part of that marriage. Give her a sense of security. And then number 8, recognize the validity of her moods. A man needs to know a woman. He needs to be familiar with women and realize that sometimes there may be a little moodiness. He needs to realize that and not allow that to affect his marriage in a negative way. Recognize the validity of her moods. And then number 9, cooperate with her in every effort to improve your marriage. It is more difficult for men to be willing to go to a marriage counselor or an elder or a preacher and try to work on a marriage problem. We men find it difficult to be willing to do that. Women are more willing to do it. They might say, let's go through this marriage counseling thing and let's go to a marriage seminar. Let's work on our marriage. A man needs to be willing to cooperate with his wife in trying to improve that marriage. And then discover her particular individual needs and try to meet them. A man doesn't need to have to study trying to find out what the average woman needs and wants in her marriage. He needs to find out what his wife needs and wants. He needs to please her. He needs to do what she would like for him to do in that marriage. These 10 suggestions, I think, will help us have better marriages. I read something else that might be helpful. Several years ago, a West German magazine released a study by Dr. Arthur Sasbo, which he conducted for an insurance company. He took a survey. They needed some for some reason. And he found that husbands who kiss their wives every morning live an average of 5 years longer than a man who didn't kiss his wife every morning. It might be helpful to husbands, you see, to do that. There's some little things that could be helpful to a marriage if we're concerned about making it what we want it to be. I ran across a poem that I think is a good, helpful one. It's a prayer that men ought to pray. Lord, may there be no moment in my life when she regrets that she became my wife. Help me to the utmost that I can to prove myself her measure of a man. Since years must bring to all their load of care, let us together every burden bear. And when death beckons one its path alone, may not the two of us be parted long. That's a good prayer for men to pray. Let's be thankful for our wives and be willing to make any sacrifice that we need to make our homes what it ought to be. That's what it means to be a husband. Well, now we're going to be getting into some specific things in future lessons, but hopefully these suggestions for wives and husbands might give you some thought about how you can make your marriage better. Appreciate the fact that you're here today.